I'm basically saying that it's going to take you, the people, to institute what you want, to educate the people in the community, to educate the people everywhere what we want, what we design, what we need, to educate the people to the need for change, to educate the people to the basic political desires and needs of people as a whole.
The LAPD hates the First Amendment. Let's talk about it. After the past month's worth of increasing community action, the LAPD has been getting worse and worse and worse on their cracking down on people who are expressing their First Amendment right to assemble. The residents of Los Angeles went out to protest the displacement of homeless people at Echo Park Lake and were met with what seemed to be every law enforcement officer on staff in LA. The residents of LA assembled a few days ago to hold a vigil for Dante Wright, not long after the homeless displacement over at Echo Park Lake. And guess what? Even though people assembled to pay their respects, of course, the police decided to harass the members of the community by assembling in a number of officers large enough to intimidate virtually any crowd of people, no matter the size. Now, after the LAPD's consistent acts of aggression, they released a joint propaganda video to Twitter in which they partnered with the Radio and Television News Association to create a public service announcement. But all they did was admit to the public the fact they're controlling the means by which people are allowed to express their First Amendment freedom of the press. They probably realized this immediately after posting and deleted it, but guess what? I managed to save myself a copy, and this is what we will be looking at today.
We want to discuss how members of the media and police can best work together to ensure the rights of journalists are respected as police officers work to facilitate First Amendment protected activity.
All right, so they said they want to ensure the rights of journalists are respected. Well, the best way to do that is to have the LAPD stop literally targeting journalists for arrest and harassment. Now, additionally, there are many video clips which are uploaded to Twitter proving the seemingly anecdotal claim true. So, and a good account to follow on Twitter is the People City Council, because they post a lot all the time, every day, and you can get up to date with a lot of stuff in LA, especially with this type of stuff. So, the entire purpose behind the creation and release of this video is to control the parameters by which members of the public may express their First Amendment right to report and publish information. Let's take a look at a few protections provided to all California residents, which are written explicitly in the California Constitution. Clearly stated in Article 1, Section 3 of the most recent iteration of the California State Constitution is the right of the California people to instruct their representatives, petition governments for redress of grievances, and assemble freely to consult for the common good. Now, here are some California press-related laws just for everyone's information. The California Public Records Act, which is for journalists, gives you the right to access government records. So you can ask the California government for virtually any government documents, minus a few exceptions. And this is for the average person, anybody who uses their phone to record police conduct. It's called the California Shield Law, which allows you to protect confidential sources, and it protects lawyers from hauling you into court to testify about your news gathering activity. Now, different rules apply depending on the context of each situation, but whenever someone tries to force you to turn over your notes, or a photographer to release their unpublished photos, the Shield Law could apply, and you just make it known. California Shield Law applies. Often authority figures, I assume any state law enforcement officer, rely on the assumption that a journalist won't know this law. So if this ever happens again, don't forget to make it known that the California Shield Law applies. So you can also call the California News Publishers Association's legal helpline for any general legal questions regarding news gathering. Now, I will put the number on the screen. If you are being approached by a law enforcement officer, you should download this app called Mobile Justice, in which you can stream to an online ACLU server, your local ACLU live, giving access to the footage directly to your local ACLU. And it gives you access to up-to-date information regarding your rights, as well as important actions in your area. I think it is pretty well known how the LAPD genuinely has zero regard for public assembly, especially when it is to either scrutinize them or to demand the literal redressing of grievances held by individual members of the public directly affected by unlawful arrest or murders at the hands of police, who may not have the means to afford a lawsuit against the LAPD, as they can easily get out of accepting guilt of injury, whether it be done willfully or negligently. It is much harder to obtain evidence of this when law enforcement officers can just target journalists for arrest and ignore every law, especially when the flow of information in society is essentially controlled by journalists. It is even more important to protect journalists. So now you, or even people just recording stuff. So you may be wondering, what does the term redress mean in legal terms? Well, just to be certain, according to this online legal dictionary, redress can mean compensation for injuries sustained, recovery or restitution for harms or injury, damages, or equitable relief. Redress can also be referred to the act of receiving satisfaction for an injury sustained. Considering the fact it is difficult for individual members of the public, increasingly so the more poor you are, to receive satisfaction for injuries sustained at the hands of the state through legal means, which are basically the only means, as most cases of police brutality, and this is just an assumption, go unreported unless videos of them go viral amongst the members of the public via the internet. Not to mention, most times that isn't even enough, and people feel the need for urgent action, so they publicly assemble to scrutinize the negligent or deliberate actions of this country's law enforcement institutions. Those founders who gave America the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights literally intended the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights be expressed in the way in which Black Lives Matter is expressing it. Also clearly stated is that the people of California have the right of access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business, and therefore the meetings of public bodies and the writings of public officials and agencies shall be open to public scrutiny. Now, the Organization of American States and the United Nations both recognize the rights of all human beings to have access to information. So if the LAPD is intentionally arresting journalists or people recording on their phones the information, they are literally preventing the information from being published so that people can access that information. Literally, they are restricting access to information by preventing the publishing of information. So another claim in the video or whatever was police officers are working to facilitate First Amendment protected activity. It really should go without saying that the LAPD has no right in interfering with individual expression of their First Amendment in any capacity, with obviously a few exceptions, as free speech absolutism is a very dumb and ignorant concept. I'm sorry. So the fact they're facilitating is basically them explicitly admitting they're controlling the means by which people were allowed to express their First Amendment rights, because there should be free speech and free press absolutism so long as there exist consequences for deliberately harmful speech or the deliberate spread of misinformation through the press, which rarely happens at protests consisting of assembled members of the public in a peaceful manner, unless you are someone like Andy Ngo or Michael Tracy, you weaselly little liars, dude.
The internet and social media platforms have allowed many independent and non-affiliated community members to cover and report on newsworthy events.
The Los Angeles Police Department does not require a press credential for a community member or news reporter to cover press conferences, rallies, or demonstrations.
Okay, so they said the internet and many social media platforms have allowed many independent and non-affiliated community members to cover and report on newsworthy events. So already this video implicitly establishes the fact that anyone can be considered a member of the press so long as they are posting their information on the social media platforms or other public internet spaces. There have been people who live stream on Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc. Yet there still exists footage of these individuals being arrested before other members of a community expressing their right to assembly. And there is also footage of police telling people recording they either know their identity or they should be targeted for arrest. Now, here was the thing. The police probably used this excuse amongst an unknowable number of other excuses that blogs, social media platforms, and internet news publications are not considered press in legal terms, because these penal codes were written by literal fossils like in 1870s or something like that. That's super duper old. So the video also says the LAPD does not require press credentials for a community member or news reporter to cover press conferences, rallies, or demonstrations. So this is technically correct according to the California Department of Parks and Recreation, who I assume is responsible for handling permits and permit applications to film. under their section titled photography that does not require a permit, they explicitly state no permit is required for news agencies in the process of gathering breaking news for television broadcast or print media. Filming or photography for non-breaking news media, such as magazine formats and delayed broadcast feature programs, may not require permits. A permit may be required for still photography done in conjunction with feature or editorial print articles. So, when we look at the term, the term press, we need to look at the legal definition, which is the art of printing, which is interchangeable with the term publish, which legally means to circulate, distribute, or print information for the public at large. There was an official document or memo from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division in 2012 detailing the circumstances in which people are allowed to record police public conduct. So here are the ways you can be arrested while recording police. If you're jeopardizing the safety of the officer, suspect, or others in the vicinity, if you violate the law or incite others to violate the law, if you're obstructing an officer's investigation by verbally engaging with a witness or an officer. This document is even self-aware of the fact that, quote, this language encourages officers to use their discretion in inappropriate and possibly unlawful ways. Instead, law enforcement should, quote, encourage officers to provide ways in which individuals can continue to exercise their First Amendment rights as officers perform their duties, rather than looking for potential violations of the law in order to restrict the individual's recording. In regards to having the ability to record the police unobstructed, there is no reason for police to arrest people in attendance of a public assembly if they are there for the purposes of documenting the events to later publish to the public. Law enforcement officers should just leave everyone they see recording alone just for recording their actions, because there was no way for the police to tell if those people recording are just independent journalists who do not have the means to obtain press credentials, which appear legitimate enough for the police to not harass them or arrest them, or whether they are just an average protester filming. So, it is insane to me that this document even tells law enforcement agencies to provide ways for people to exercise their First Amendment rights when they shouldn't be doing anything at all, and they should just be respecting those rights. This video is the LAPD explicitly attempting to do this, however. But it is ridiculous that these law enforcement agencies get to set these standards and determinations rather than having studies published funded by Congress to determine a set of guidelines that are based in objectivity to the maximum degree possible and must be universally respected to, yeah.
Press credential is required to enter police and fire lines to cover news events which may happen behind such lines. Additionally, the department has had a long-standing rule to recognize press credentials issued by other law enforcement agencies. In some cases, a reporter or a photographer's official employee identification may also work. To view the LAPD's media press credential policy, visit lapdonline.org. The site will also take you through the requirements and process to obtain a press credential per the Los Angeles Municipal Code and City Charter.
Okay, so it is clearly very important for everyone to attempt to get a press badge, but oh, would you look at that? The LAPD only issues press badges to whoever they deem worthy of being labeled as actual news gathering representatives of newspapers or publications, news services, radio or television stations maintaining a regular news service, or to self-employed reporters and photographers who regularly cover news events at which police and or fire lines. Now, if you are a self-employed reporter, as majority of the average reporters I would assume are, you have to pay the LAPD $63 just to let them know that you are deemed worthy of receiving the privilege of expressing your First Amendment rights unobstructed. I would imagine a majority of self-employed reporters could even swing that amount of money without having to worry about budgeting their finances accordingly. The application itself seems like it would turn away a large number of applicants based on its requirements. It's as if the LAPD is literally slapping a label on the humans who deserve to exercise their First Amendment freedom to obtain and publish information, and the humans who do not deserve that right.
California laws, such as 409 and 409.5 PC define some duties and responsibilities of the police and the media at the scenes of civil unrest and at the scene of natural disasters such as fires, earthquakes, and other calamities. The goal of these statutes is to ensure police officers and members of the media both work together to facilitate reasonable access while adhering to measures meant to protect police command posts, crime scenes, and the safety of all media and community members. If you're a member of the media, always consider your safety first. In the event of a public assembly has been declared unlawful, here are some steps you can take to ensure your safety while preserving your right to cover the assembly. Move to a position of safety away from the crowd. Approach an officer or supervisor in the scene and ask for a designated media area. Ensure you have a visible identification as a member of the media. This could be a press credential, a mic flag, or clothing with a company logo. Have the company number of a watch commander or media relations representative. It is important to remember members of the media are subject to arrest if they remain at the scene of an assembly that has been declared unlawful.
Okay, so basically, the goal of these statutes is to ensure police officers and members of the media both work together to facilitate reasonable acts while adhering to measures meant to protect police, command posts, crime scenes, and the safety of all media and community members. That's what he said, right? So now I'm no lawyer, and I'm just looking at these penal codes at face value, and it would appear as if both of them were just cited to intimidate the public, basically letting the public know they shouldn't record police conduct on their phones because they aren't safe. Nobody is safe. Now, Penal Code 409 PC clearly stated, also conveniently, not even highlighted in the video, that every person caught in the scenario, even those with $63 press badges, are subject to a misdemeanor, despite the press badge explicitly saying it is okay for people to be caught up in these scenarios. Additionally, I would like an honest defense from literally anyone who thinks people with cameras and microphones or people who are recording on their cell phones can seriously be considered a threat to the police. I genuinely like to hear it, because there is no defense for that. And the police shouldn't have something so dumb and trivial as that as one of their excuses to justify their gross negligence or deliberate misconduct. How are people supposed to film the actions of the police if they disagree with their declaration of what is unlawful? You see, when Gandhi was persecuted during his Salt March, it became such an important event in the liberation of India from British colonial presence because the state had acted so unlawfully in the face of virtually the most unjustified act of violence ever, and there were members of the press present to document and report on what happened. No holds barred, and they got scrutinized publicly for it. But we can't scrutinize the LAPD. They just won't let us. So whatever.
Police officers engaged in crowd management and crowd control maneuvers are trained to facilitate the rights of the press to cover these events. Recent events in Los Angeles and around the country have highlighted how some persons blur the lines between functioning as press versus functioning as an activist. To help keep yourself from being considered part of the protest, the LAPD recommends the following. Do not engage in conduct that shows you as an active participant in the event. Do not participate in any unlawful conduct or acts of violence. Do not interfere with the actions of the police officers at the scene or officers on a line. Move to the designated media area if an unlawful assembly has been declared.
Where you can express your rights. Okay, so they go over some of the ways you can be arrested, which I also did, but they also explicitly said they are facilitating the rights of the press, despite the Constitution and the California Constitution explicitly stating that the rights of the press shall not be infringed upon by the state. Yet, here the state is facilitating those rights, interfering, which in my mind is basically the same as infringing, since they are controlling and limiting those rights to who they deem worthy of being allowed to express those rights. They're literally labeling people like, you got $63? All right, you can have your rights for $63. They all, and not even guaranteed. So they also said that people blur the lines between functioning as press and as activists. Basically, they're saying that if you're a member of the press, you are not allowed to outwardly express your support for Black lives, trans rights, or anti-fascism. You aren't allowed to express yourself for supporting humanitarian causes. Additionally, they try to establish designated media viewing areas, clearly controlling what the world sees and primary source information is able and what primary source information is able to be published and distributed to the public. The vast majority of the police force in America consists of conservatives. Now, there are conservative influencers like Dr. Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro who use the same talking points. Well, maybe not Peterson, but to try preventing all societal changes. Well, yeah, I guess overall from preventing all societal changes from ever occurring. So these, of course, include things like women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, trans rights, etc., etc. So right-wingers have always labeled people pushing for their basic human rights outside agitators, which they then coat in an additional coat of paint, usually something associated with leftism. This can include Marxism, socialism, communism, anarchism, etc. Police in this country act on the will of the state to preserve the state, and the state's interests are rooted in anti-humanitarian beliefs such as white supremacy, Western supremacy, capitalism, etc., etc. Because these people are associated with Antifa or Black Lives Matter for showing up at a public assembly of people, they are then associated with that extra coat of paint I just mentioned, these ideas of communism and whatnot, giving the police and conservatives amongst the population the perfect justification to dehumanize these outside agitators as if they are undeserving of the basic human rights afforded to every human born on American soil. These outside agitators then become the people who are now infiltrating American society and are trying to change all of the nationalist cultural traditions right-wingers are fighting so hard to preserve. This is how the police state is maintained through manufacturing consent, by labeling people even if they don't agree with or identify with those labels, because that base of people is controlled by fear, the fear of outside agitators.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, leave a like, leave a comment. Head on over to our Patreon account, support the channel. See you later. Our revolution is not explained by the hunger of the masses, but by the thirst for dignity. Our socialism does not, therefore, aim at ingenious distribution of material wealth to economically equalize men who are economically different. Our socialism aims at liberating men.